Are you really going to ask Dad to help you with the bakery again? That was what my brother said to me at my cousin Danielle's engagement party, right in the middle of the living room, loud enough for everyone near the appetizer table to hear. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't look embarrassed. He just stood there with his glass of sparkling water and waited for my answer, like he'd asked me something perfectly reasonable. I was 24 years old, holding a plate of food I suddenly didn't want anymore, and every aunt and uncle within earshot had gone just a little bit quieter. I didn't answer him. I set my plate down on the nearest surface, smiled at nobody in particular, and walked to the hallway to get my coat. My mother caught my eye as I passed. She didn't say anything either. She just gave me that look, the one that said, "Well, what did you expect?" I'd expected nothing. That was the problem. I'd stopped expecting things from my family around the time I turned 22, and realized that no matter what I did, I would always be the daughter who was figuring it out, while my brother Kyle was the son who had already arrived. Let me tell you how we got there. I grew up in Guelph, Ontario, the younger of two kids. My brother Kyle is 4 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to understand how family dynamics worked, I understood that Kyle operated in a different category than I did. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cruel, not in an obvious way. It was just the quiet, steady accumulation of 1,000 small differences that, over the years, added up to something impossible to ignore. When Kyle graduated from university with a business degree, my parents threw him a party at a rented hall. 60-something people, catered food, a slideshow. I watched the whole thing from a corner table and told myself it was because he was the first to graduate. When I finished my culinary arts diploma 2 years later, we had dinner at my parents' house. Immediate family only. My mom made lasagna, which she always made when she didn't want to put in extra effort, and my dad gave me a card with $100 in it and said, "So, what's the plan now?" Not congratulations. Not, "We're proud of you." Just, "What's the plan?" The plan, as it turned out, was to work in other people's kitchens for 2 years, save every dollar I could, and eventually open the small bakery I'd been dreaming about since I was 15 years old. I'd grown up baking with my grandmother, my dad's mother, not my mom's, and there was something about flour and butter, and the particular kind of patience that baking required, that made me feel like myself in a way nothing else did. My grandmother, Nana Cecile, was the only one who never made me feel like I was running behind. She used to say that good bread doesn't rush, and neither should the person making it. She passed away when I was 23, and she left me $8,000. It was almost everything she had, and she left it specifically to me, not to Kyle. My parents never mentioned that, but I know it registered. I used every cent of those $8,000, plus the money I'd saved, to start building a business plan for what I was going to call Clementine's, a small batch bakery focusing on sourdough, seasonal pastries, and custom celebration cakes. Nothing enormous, just mine. When I was 24, I went to my dad and asked him if he'd be willing to co-sign a small business loan. Not give me money. Co-sign a loan. I had a full business plan printed out and bound. I'd done my research. I knew my numbers. I sat down with him at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon while my mom was in the other room, and I walked him through the whole thing. He listened. He nodded in some of the right places. And then he said, "I don't know, Ivy. Bakeries are risky. Most of them fail in the first 2 years. I just don't think I can put my name on something that uncertain." I asked if he'd at least think about it. He said he would. He never brought it up again. 3 months later, my parents announced that they were giving Kyle $140,000 as an early inheritance to help him and his wife, Renata, purchase their first home in Oakville. My dad explained it at a family dinner like it was the most natural thing in the world. They wanted to help Kyle get established, get the kids into a good school district, give the family some stability. It was the right time. I sat at that table and did the arithmetic in my head. $140,000. And he couldn't co-sign a loan for a bakery because bakeries were risky. I didn't say anything at dinner. Not one word. I helped clear the dishes afterward, and I drove home to my apartment, and I sat on my kitchen floor for a while, which sounds more dramatic than it was. I wasn't crying. I was just very, very still, the way you get when something confirms what you already knew but hoped wasn't true. The night of Danielle's engagement party, 6 months after that dinner, was when Kyle made his comment in front of everyone. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by then, I had already stopped asking. I want to be honest about what came next, because it wasn't a straight line, and it wasn't easy, and there were months where I genuinely didn't know if I was making the right choice. After I left that party, I called my best friend, Priya, from the parking lot. Priya had known me since we were 11 years old, and she had a way of listening without filling all the silence with reassurance, which was exactly what I needed. I told her what Kyle said. I told her I was done asking my family for anything. She said, "Okay, so, what do you need?" That question. I've thought about it 100 times since. Not, "I'm so sorry," or, "He's awful," or, "You deserve better." Just, "What do you need?" What I needed was a plan that didn't involve my family at all. I spent the next 3 months doing research I should have done earlier. I found out about the Canada Small Business Financing Program. I connected with a business advisor through the Guelph Chamber of Commerce, who helped me revise my plan and sharpen my projections. I applied for a microloan through a local women's entrepreneurship fund. I did not tell my parents any of this. The microloan came through first $15,000. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to secure a short-term lease on a small commercial kitchen space on the east side of the city, buy the equipment I needed secondhand, and launch Clementine's as a home delivery and farmers market operation while I built my customer base. My first market was on a Saturday in early May. I loaded my car at 4:30 in the morning, set up my table by 6, and sold out of everything I'd brought by 11:15. Sourdough loaves, cardamom morning buns, brown butter shortbread with flaked sea salt. A woman bought 6 loaves of the sourdough and asked if I had a website. I didn't yet. I told her I'd have one by the following weekend. I did. Priya helped me set up an Instagram account that same afternoon. Photos taken on her phone in the parking lot of the market with whatever natural light we had. By Sunday evening, I had 200 followers. By the following Saturday, I had 400 and a waiting list for the next market. I want to be very clear. None of this happened because I was exceptional. It happened because I worked. I woke up at 4 in the morning, 4 days a week. I researched packaging and labeling requirements and food safety certifications. I reinvested almost everything I earned back into the business in those first months. There was a period of about 6 weeks where I was so tired that I cried in the car on the way home from the market, not because anything was wrong, but just because my body didn't have anything left. But something else was happening too. For the first time in my adult life, every decision was mine. Every success was mine. Every failure was mine. There was nobody to ask for permission, and nobody to disappoint except myself. And that freedom, as terrifying as it was, turned out to be the thing that made me work harder than I ever had before. My family didn't know any of this was happening. I'd stepped back from most family events after Danielle's party. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I said I was busy. I was. I missed a birthday dinner. I missed a Canada Day barbecue. I sent gifts and cards. I kept things polite. My mother texted occasionally and I answered, but I kept my answers short. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was just finished. There's a difference. By the end of that first summer, Clementine's had a steady farmers market presence, a small but growing online order operation, and enough revenue that I'd paid back half the microloan ahead of schedule. My business advisor told me I was moving faster than most of her clients. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just kept going. In October of that year, a spot opened up in a small commercial strip near the university. A previous tenant had left mid-lease, and the landlord was motivated. The space was 800 square feet, had a commercial kitchen already partially built out, and the rent was manageable if my projections held. I signed the lease on a Tuesday, and cried in the parking lot again, this time for a different reason. Clementine's opened its doors on a Thursday morning in the first week of November. I had a small lineup before I unlocked the door. Priya was there. A few regulars from the farmers market were there. A woman from the university's student newspaper came and wrote a tiny piece that ran online the next day. I served coffee and samples and sold out of my display case by 2 in the afternoon. My parents didn't know about the opening. I hadn't told them. Here is where the story gets complicated, and I want to tell it as honestly as I can. About 8 months after Clementine's opened, my brother Kyle called me. This was unusual. Kyle and I had spoken maybe twice in the past year, and both times were at family events we couldn't avoid. He called on a weeknight, around 7, and when I answered, he sounded different, quieter than usual. He told me that he and Renata were having some difficulties, that some of the financial assumptions they'd made when they bought the house hadn't worked out the way they'd expected. He didn't give me details, and I didn't ask for them. And then he said something I hadn't anticipated. He said, "I heard you opened a bakery." I said yes. He said, "How's it going?" I said it was going well. There was a pause, and then he said, "Mom found it online. She showed me the Instagram." I didn't respond to that. I waited. He said, "She looked at the reviews." I still didn't say anything. He exhaled. "You've done really well, Ivy. I want to tell you that was enough. I want to tell you that hearing that from my brother made everything feel resolved. But honestly, sitting on my couch in my apartment that night, I felt something more like exhaustion than satisfaction. Not the tired kind of exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally being able to set it down. It's relief, mostly, but it also just hurts for a minute, because you realize how heavy it actually was. I told him thank you. He asked if we could get coffee sometime. I said maybe. I meant it, too, not as a deflection, but as a genuine maybe. I wasn't sure yet what I wanted from a relationship with my brother going forward, and I'd learned enough about myself in the past 2 years to know that I didn't need to figure that out right then. My mother called the following week. She didn't mention the bakery directly. She asked how I was. She mentioned a few family things. And then toward the end of the call she said, "I saw your Instagram page. Your pastries look beautiful." That was all she said about it. I said thank you. She said, "Your grandmother would have been proud." And then she moved on to something else, because that's who she is, and that's who she's always been, and I've made my peace with the fact that this is probably as close to an acknowledgement as I'll ever get from her. It's not everything I once wanted, but it's something, and I've chosen to take it as something. Clementine's is now in its 2nd year of operation. We've expanded our hours, added 2 part-time staff members, and launched a wholesale partnership with 3 local coffee shops that carry our sourdough and a rotating selection of seasonal pastries. I'm currently in conversations with a 2nd location, though I'm moving slowly and carefully, because I've learned that patience is not the same as hesitation. I still wake up at 4 in the morning most days. I still love it. Priya is my unofficial taste tester, and the person who redesigned my logo when the first one wasn't quite right. I've never had a partner in the romantic sense through any of this, that's just not where my life has been, but I've had Priya, and that has been enough. More than enough. I've thought a lot about what I would say if someone asked me what I learned from all of this. Not in a polished, interview-ready way, but actually what do I know now that I didn't know at 24? I know that the people who don't invest in you are sometimes, unintentionally, the ones who force you to invest in yourself. I don't say that to be generous to my family. I say it because it's true, and because pretending that the difficulty didn't have anything useful in it would be a kind of dishonesty I'm not interested in. I know that asking for help and asking for permission are 2 completely different things. I spent years confusing them. I thought I needed my father's approval on my loan, because I needed his belief in me, and those aren't the same. Help is practical. Permission is emotional. I could have sought the practical help from other places all along. I was just looking for the emotional validation in the same transaction, and those 2 things don't always come in the same package. I know that resentment and distance are also different things. I distanced myself from my family, not out of anger, or not only out of anger, but because I needed space to become something without being watched by people who had already decided what I was. That was a legitimate need. Taking that space was one of the better decisions I've made. And I know this is the one that took me the longest, that you don't have to wait for the people who underestimated you to acknowledge it before you're allowed to feel proud of yourself. The acknowledgement is nice when it comes. It's not nothing, but it's also not the finish line. The finish line is your own life, built by your own hands, lived according to what you actually value. That's where the real thing is. My grandmother used to tell me that good bread needs time and the right conditions, and if you rush it or put it somewhere cold and loveless, it won't rise the way it's meant to. She wasn't really talking about bread when she said that, I don't think. Or maybe she was, and I just heard it differently. Either way, she was right. If you're somewhere right now feeling like the one in your family who got the short end of every stick, less support, less recognition, less faith, I want you to know that I'm not going to tell you it doesn't matter. It matters. It hurt me for a long time, and it still does, a little, on certain days. But I will tell you that the hunger it creates, if you let it, becomes something you can build with. Not because struggle is beautiful, or because hardship is a gift. It isn't. But because you are more capable than the people who underestimated you know, and the only way to prove that to yourself, first, and then to anyone else, is to stop waiting for their investment and start making your own. Clementine's is mine. Every loaf, every morning, every decision, mine. And honestly, that feels better than any co-signed loan ever could have. If this story connected with something in your own life, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and if you know someone who's been told they're not worth the investment, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing you're not the only one.